She was sent in place of her sister. A middle-aged woman, once with a broken heart, was pushed onto a train to the Wild West, where a strange man was waiting for his male bride. But when the train car doors opened, what he saw was not the woman in the photo. It was Mrs. If one day life puts you in Mary Ellen's shoes, the one who was wrongly chosen, the one who is called replacement, what will you do? Stay to prove your worth, or turn away to protect your self-esteem? Sometimes, love comes not from the right choice, but from the seemingly unforgivable mistake. And perhaps the most beautiful thing is not to be loved first, but to be chosen forever. Have you ever felt like you came in late, but were the last one to leave? Join me as we walk through the story she was sent. Instead of her sister as a mail-order bride, the rancher saw her and chose her forever. A journey of courage, healing, and belated but profound love to the end. If you feel this story touches your heart, please like and share and subscribe to the channel to continue this emotional journey with me. Late afternoon, in the small wooden kitchen of a house at the end of a red dirt road on the outskirts of Lincoln, Mary Ellen Granger sat silently at the oak table. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the window, casting a shaky light on her thin hands. Before her was a yellowed envelope, sealed with red wax, written in the neat handwriting of a man from the West, to Miss Lydia Granger, Lincoln, Nebraska. Mary Ellen had read the letter over and over again. Inside was a marriage proposal from a man named Samuel Holt, who owned a horse farm in Redwillow County, nearly 300 miles away. He wrote that he needed a wife who could take care of the homestead, someone who could help him rebuild the farm after years of loss. Each sentence was simple and short, but there was a sincerity in it that made her heart ache. The letter was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Lydia, her beautiful younger sister, 10 years her junior. Lydia was admired by all her golden hair, her voice as sweet as honey, and her eyes always made men bow. But Lydia feared the aridity of the West, feared the loneliness of snowy nights, feared a life without music and tea parties. When Mr. Holt sent her letter and the bride price, Lydia only smiled, folded the letter, and a few weeks later, she disappeared with a wealthy merchant from Chicago. Mary Ellen picked up the pieces. Their parents had died young, leaving her and Lydia alone. When the postman returned with an envelope thick with bride price money, neighbors began whispering that the Grangers were frauds, a widow who made her living by sewing. She knew that gossip could kill a reputation faster than the wind. That night, she lit an oil lamp and sat at the kitchen table all night. Finally, she wrote a short letter to Mr. Holt. I am Lydia's sister. She cannot come. If you still need someone to keep that promise, I will go instead. Not to deceive, just to keep the family honor. The next morning, she packed a few things into an old suitcase, a worn Bible, a photograph of her late husband in his gray military uniform, and a wooden necklace her son had given her before he died of malaria at age 7. The train pulled out of Lincoln at dawn. Coal smoke billowed into the sky, and the wind carried the smell of rust and burning straw. Mary Ellen sat by the window, looking out at the seemingly endless fields. She figured it would take almost 2.5 days to reach Redwillow, more than 180 miles, over low hills and shallow rivers. In the train, an old German woman asked, "Are you going so far to meet someone?" Dear Mary Ellen smiled. "Someone I have never met before. But he is waiting for someone else." The woman smiled softly and did not ask further. The train continued to hum. the rhythm of the wheels as steady as someone's heartbeat trying to stay calm. As the train stopped at small stations, Mary Ellen watched the farmers in straw hats, the children chasing the carriages, the crowing of roosters in the wind. She thought of Lydia not with anger, but with a mixture of pity and sadness. My sister was born to be surrounded by lights and music, and I, perhaps, was born to endure. The second night the train passed through a vast meadow, where the moonlight bathed the fields in silver. Mary Ellen opened the window slightly, and a cold wind rushed in, ruffling a few strands of her silver hair. She took out Samuel's letter and read it again. I don't promise life will be easy. I just promise there will always be a light on in the house waiting for you when you come home. She closed the letter, her eyes looking far away. Something stirred inside her, not exactly hope, but something fragile, like a yearning to believe again. On the morning of the third day, the train stopped at the last station, a small station in the middle of the Redwillow grasslands. The sky was clear. The wind carried the smell of burnt grass and dry earth. There were only a few people on the platform: an old postman, 2 boys carrying milk crates, and a tall man in a brown leather jacket and cowboy hat. He stood next to his chestnut horse, his eyes cold but sad. Mary Ellen stepped down, carrying a suitcase. She knew at once it was Samuel Holt. Mr. Holt, she said, her voice low but firm. He nodded. You are Lydia. She took a deep breath. No, sir. I am her sister. I came in her place not to deceive her, but to keep my word. The wind died down for a moment. Samuel looked at her for a long time, then bowed his head. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Mary Ellen smiled slightly. Just let me come with you until you decide. Samuel nodded, took the suitcase, and loaded it onto the horse. The farm is 10 miles away. Let's go before dark. The red dirt road stretched across the vast fields. The horse's hooves echoed, and the wind blew through her hair. In the distance, the sun was sinking behind the mountains, its light dyeing the grasslands a honey color. In Mary Ellen's heart, there was a vague fear of rejection, fear of being redundant once again. But mixed with that was a strange calm. At least, this time, I chose to be honest. Their story begins like this, with a mistake, a promise, and a journey with no return. The train had long since departed, leaving only a vast emptiness between Mary Ellen and the strange land. Samuel Holt led the horse, his posture steady as if accustomed to solitude. Mary Ellen followed quietly, her skirts brushing the dry grass along the trail. The red dirt road wound westward, winding around silver-gray hills. In the distance, rocky mountains mingled with clouds, and vultures circled overhead. The sun was setting, and the last light fell over Samuel's shoulders, casting his shadow long and deep on the ground. Mary Ellen slowed to catch her breath. She was used to manual labor, but the long journey from Lincoln had left her knees aching. The wind carried the familiar scents of horsehide, dry earth, and male sweat. How far is your farm? She asked, trying to keep her voice even. Samuel glanced at the sun. About 10 miles. We'll be there before dark. His voice was low and hoarse, like the sound of wood rubbing against wood. They were silent again. The horse's hooves echoed loudly on the dry ground, the iron soles of its horseshoes scraping against the gravel. After a while, Samuel asked softly, you said you were Lydia's sister. Do you know why she didn't come? Mary Ellen tightened her grip on the suitcase. I know, but maybe that's not important anymore. It is important. I don't like being lied to. She looked up at him, her eyes gentle but frank. "Me too. That's why I came here. To tell the truth." Samuel was silent, then simply nodded. The two continued walking, each with their own thoughts. Towards dusk they passed an old roadstead, a few broken barrels, a shallow well, and a bare birch tree. Samuel stopped and tied his horse to drink. He poured Mary Ellen some water from his canteen and said in a low voice, "Would you like to rest?" "Thank you. I'm fine." She took it and took a small sip. The water tasted of iron, but it was cool. The last light of day faded to a reddish orange. In that moment, Mary Ellen took a closer look at Samuel, his calloused hands, his strong wrists, the lines of his face marked by the sun and wind. There was something about him that made people want to approach him and yet feel distant. It was dark when they arrived. Samuel's farmhouse loomed out of the darkness, a large wooden house with a long porch, a large stable beside it, the light of an oil lamp flickering through the crack in the door. Horses snorted, chains squealed. The smell of hay and leather hung in the air, suggesting a once populated place now deserted. Samuel led the horse into the stable and unsaddled it. Mary Ellen put her suitcase down on the porch steps and looked around. The sky was full of stars, so quiet you could hear the insects. She had never seen such a vast sky. When he turned back, she asked softly, "Do you live here alone?" "Yes, since my wife and children died. It's just me and the horses." He spoke simply, but there was something in his voice that made Mary Ellen feel a lump in her throat. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Samuel nodded, then opened the door. "Come in. It's colder here at night than you think. Inside." The cabin was neat, sparsely furnished but clean. An old violin hung on the wall and a few faded photographs. The dining table had only 2 chairs, and a small fire was burning in the fireplace. Samuel poured her a cup of weak tea. "You can stay in the small room in the back for now. Tomorrow morning, I will take you back to town if you want." Mary Ellen looked into the fire and replied softly, "You don't have to rush. I'm not running away from anyone. I'll stay and help you for a few days, until you decide." The air between them seemed thick. Samuel nodded slightly and left the kitchen, going out onto the porch to smoke. Mary Ellen sat alone, looking around the room. On the table, some woman's glass was still upside down, as if its owner still refused to believe that the person who had used it had left this world. She gently placed her hand on the wooden table. It felt rough and warm. This house had once had laughter. Then it was silent. Now there was only the sound of wind. That night, she could not sleep. The wind whistled through the cracks in the door. The oil lamp flickered. In her dreams, she saw her dead husband, the gentle smile of her little child. Then their silhouettes gradually faded away in the dim light. When she woke, it was still dark. She could hear the sound of a wild turkey in the distance. She put on her coat and went out onto the porch. Samuel was already up, lighting a fire in the stables. "You're up early," she said, her voice still hoarse from the cold. "Here. The day begins before sunrise," he replied, without raising his head. She looked at him for a moment, then went over to help. They lit the fire, the wood crackling. Mary Ellen took off her scarf and tied her hair back. Samuel glanced at her, smiling slightly. "Are you used to this kind of work? I lived in a nurse's camp during the war," she replied. "There, you learn to do everything with your hands." The words made him silent for a long moment. The wind carried the scent of smoke, and in that moment they were no longer strangers. As the sun rose, the meadow was bathed in light. Mary Ellen made coffee. the steam rising fragrantly. Samuel sat on the porch steps, holding a tin cup, his eyes fixed on the distance. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "This land is difficult to live in. The weak-hearted leave," she replied. "Perhaps so, but those who have lost so much cling to the land more than anyone else." Samuel looked at her, longer than usual, then nodded. At noon, he showed her around the farm. The horse pastures ran along the hillsides, and in the distance a small stream was half dry. A few colts whinnied, their manes glistening in the sun. Mary Ellen touched one of its noses, and it flattened its ears and breathed warmly. "What's his name?" she asked. "Dusty. He was born on a windy day. He's gentle." She smiled. "He's a tough guy." He said. They walked along the fence. Samuel told a few small stories about the war years, about his wife Caroline and the 6-year-old son who had died of the plague. His voice was steady, not broken, but there was something in his eyes that was more painful than tears. Mary Ellen did not interrupt, just listened. When they returned, the afternoon sun was shining golden on the porch. Samuel brought out 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her. "I don't know how long you'll be here," he said, "but if you need something to do, we're short on gardeners and chickens." "I don't mind," she replied. "I can do a lot of work." He smiled. "I think so." The afternoon breeze carried the scent of dry grass into the kitchen. In that space, there was a quietness that was not uncomfortable but gentle, as if both of them had found their first bit of peace after long years of loss. Mary Ellen looked out at the fields and thought maybe Redwillow wasn't just a place to keep her promise. Maybe it was a place to start over. The next morning, as the sun crept over the hills, a thin mist blanketed Holt Farm. Mary Ellen woke before the roosters crowed. She lit the stove, made coffee, and rolled up her sleeves to go to the chicken coop. The sound of flapping chicken wings and the smell of dry hay and rust made her feel strangely at home. She had never had a real garden in Lincoln. Here, in this harsh land, she felt like she belonged. Samuel walked into the yard, his leather jacket over his shoulders and a rope in his hand. He stood looking at her for a long time without saying anything. When Mary Ellen turned and met his gaze, she just smiled. "I guess your morning coffee is ready." Samuel nodded and took the cup from her. They sat on the porch steps in silence. The early morning wind carried the damp scent of the earth after a night of dew, and in the distance, the sunlight just touched the fields, making the grass shimmer like silver frost. "You get up earlier than me," said Samuel, with a hint of surprise in his voice. "In a place like this, a late riser misses the best part of the day." She replied. He nodded slightly, his eyes softening. For the first time, there was no longer wariness between them, but a bit of understanding. After breakfast, Mary Ellen began tidying up the kitchen. Every object, every drawer seemed untouched by a woman for a long time. She wiped dishes, cleaned the stove, folded napkins. Each task was slow and careful, as if she were stitching together the memory of a once broken home. From outside the door, Samuel called out, "You don't have to do that. I'm used to living in a mess." Mary Ellen didn't turn around. "Maybe, but I'm not used to seeing a mess for long. A house, even if it's just one person, should still be clean." He was silent, then went out to the stable. It was noon, and the weather was starting to get hot. Samuel returned, his shirt soaked with sweat. He found Mary Ellen standing in the middle of the abandoned vegetable garden, pulling weeds with a hoe. Her old dress was dusty, her hair was tied back, but her figure still exuded determination. He was about to say something, but just walked over and picked up a second hoe. "This earth is hard," he said. "Yes, but no earth can ever refuse care." He looked at her and smiled slightly. "That sounds like something from the Bible." "Maybe so." She smiled, her eyes shining. "But I learned it from life." They worked until the sun was high in the sky. They dug a long furrow. The weeds piled high. Samuel put down his hoe and looked at her. "I don't think you'll last a week here. I lived through the winter of '63 in Virginia, in a medical tent with several feet of snow. We had only dry bread and fear. So I think I can survive here." He smiled for the first time, a real smile, warming his hard face. In the afternoon, Mary Ellen baked bread and stewed meat. The house smelled delicious. Samuel walked in, his eyes lingering on the wooden table set with 2 meals. Suddenly, the image of Caroline, his ex-wife, flashed through his mind. Sadness and regret welled up, but he pushed them aside. "I don't remember the last time I had a decent meal," he said softly. "Well, now you have one." She smiled. They ate in silence, the only sound being the wind outside and the clink of spoons against ceramic bowls. Occasionally their eyes met. Then they both looked down. In the silence, the atmosphere was not heavy, but strangely warm. When the meal was over, Mary Ellen cleared the table, and Samuel lit a cigarette. He went out onto the porch and looked west. The sun was red as fire, its last rays illuminating the fields of running horses. He heard light footsteps behind him, and then Mary Ellen's voice. "I know you still don't believe me. Believe it or not doesn't matter now. You're here, and I don't want anyone else to interfere. I just want you to understand. I didn't come here because I wanted a husband. I just wanted to keep my family's promise, and maybe keep my own." Samuel turned back, his eyes softening. "You're different from anyone I've ever met." A gust of wind blew, stirring up red dust. Mary Ellen's hat almost got ripped off. Samuel reached out to catch it. His hand brushed her hair, just briefly, but it made them both freeze. He let go, stepping back. She nodded slightly, not looking away. They stood facing each other in the twilight, silent, and in that silence, something began to move, no sound, just warmth spreading through the palms of their hands. That evening, Mary Ellen sat alone by the window of her small room. She opened her Bible, reread a few lines, then wrote in her notebook. He looked at me with the eyes of someone who had lost someone, but still wanted to believe that it was possible to love again. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Outside, Samuel was still awake. He sat in the stable, stroking Dusty's mane. The horse neighed softly, as if sensing his master's mood. He remembered Lydia's letter, the flowery tone, the false sweetness, and compared it to the honest, slightly hoarse voice of the woman sleeping in the small room. The difference was too obvious for him to contemplate. Samuel wondered if God was giving him a second chance not to love as before, but to understand the value of true presence. He put out his cigarette and looked toward Mary Ellen's window. The oil lamp was still burning, its light weak but steady. That night, when the wind blew through the roof, they both stayed awake, each in their own room, listening to the rustling wind in the fields, like an old song telling the story of lonely souls who had just met. The next morning, a thick fog hung over Redwillow, blanketing everything in a silvery mist. From the porch, Samuel watched Mary Ellen light the fire in the kitchen, her movements slow and careful, almost ritualistic, The crackling of the wood mingled with the soft breath of the early morning. In the cabin, the silence was no longer empty. It was like a low, background music they had grown accustomed to hearing every day. Samuel was not a talkative person, and Mary Ellen did not need words to understand. After breakfast, she took the basket out into the garden. The beds of earth from the day before were softer now, the smell of damp earth and fresh grass mixed together. Samuel passed by, stopped to watch her plant each bean seed in the ground, his voice low and hoarse. "Aren't you afraid of failure? Spring doesn't promise anything here." Mary Ellen looked up and smiled. "I don't expect promises. I just believe that anything cared for patiently will sprout." The answer silenced him. It was not a flowery word, just a simple truth. And it was that simplicity that calmed Samuel. That afternoon, Samuel took his horse out to the field for exercise. Mary Ellen brought water and stood watching. When the unruly horse ran, Samuel held the reins and slipped, kicking up dust. She quickly ran over and knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" Samuel suppressed his pain and shook his head. "It's just an old wound. It's okay." She didn't believe it. She pulled up his sleeve and saw a long scar on his bicep. The skin was cold and gray. The wound was clearly deep, probably a legacy of the war. She gently touched it, her voice low. "This wound needs to be bandaged. Otherwise the wind will numb it." Samuel looked at her, his eyes a mixture of surprise and gratitude. He let her use a handkerchief to tie the wound. The smell of soap and lavender from her hands made him feel at peace, a feeling he had long forgotten. As evening came, the wind blew hard. The wind whistled through the roof. The boards creaked. Samuel lit more logs, but the cold still seeped through the cracks in the windows. Mary Ellen sat sewing by the fireplace, the firelight reflecting off her peaceful face. "Do you live alone in Lincoln?" Samuel asked, his voice low, as if afraid to break the silence. "I live with Lydia." She paused, her eyes looking far away. "After my husband died, I never left that house. It no longer had laughter, but at least it was still a home. And now, she sighed softly. Maybe I'm finding that concept again." Samuel was silent, his eyes fixed on her hands. In that moment, he realized that what had caught his attention was not the dexterity of her hands, but the calmness and resilience that radiated from each gesture. The small house was engulfed in flames. Outside, the wind grew fiercer, as if testing the old wooden walls. Mary Ellen spoke softly, her voice as light as the wind. "The wind here really talks a lot. Yes, in this area, the wind carries memories. Some people say they hear the voices of their deceased loved ones in the night wind." She smiled sadly. "I hear it too. Every time the wind blows, I feel like someone is calling my name." Samuel looked at her, his heart filled with an indescribable fondness. He wanted to say something, but he didn't. Instead, he added more wood to the fire. The flames flared up, illuminating the faces of the two strangers sharing the same roof, but no longer distant in their hearts. When night fell, Mary Ellen went out onto the porch. The wind had died down. A pale moon hung over the hill, its light shimmering on the strings. Samuel came out, holding his old violin. "I haven't played it for a long time," he said in a low voice. "But tonight, perhaps I should try again." The first sound was a little shaky, but gradually became fuller and warmer. The melody was simple, sad, and beautiful. Mary Ellen stood leaning against the porch pillar, closing her eyes to listen. The sound of the guitar and the wind blended together, like two lonelinesses finding harmony. When the song ended, she opened her eyes and said softly, "What's the name of that song?" "Home Again. I wrote it for my wife, Caroline. She must have loved you very much." "Maybe. But I wasn't there when she died. The plague came faster than a horse that year. I'm so sorry." Samuel put down his guitar, his voice hoarse. "I thought I'd never let anyone into this house again. But then you came. I don't know what to call it, luck or a trick of fate." Mary Ellen looked at him, the moonlight reflecting in her eyes. "Sometimes God doesn't give us what we ask for, but what we need most." Samuel smiled, a rare smile. They said nothing more. That night, the two of them sat together, listening to the wind, listening to the crickets, and listening to the very breath of a home that had just found life again. When Mary Ellen returned to her room, she lit the oil lamp, opened her notebook, and wrote, "This house was empty, but not for lack of people. It was for lack of faith. I don't know how long I will be here, but perhaps I have heard my voice in the wind." Outside, Samuel was still sitting on the porch, his eyes following the faint light from her window. There was something like hope in his heart, fragile, but enough to warm him. He said softly, as if to himself, "Perhaps silence is not just emptiness. It is the way two people learn to understand each other without speaking." The whole house fell silent again. But in that silence, the sound of the human heart echoed clearly. The days that followed passed as slowly as the pulse of the land. Each morning, a rooster crowed from the barn, followed by the clatter of the millstones and the neighing of horses from the distant hills. Mary Ellen fell into the rhythm of life as naturally as if she had been born here. She rose before dawn, lit the fire, and prepared coffee and cornbread. Samuel would appear just as the aroma of coffee wafted through the kitchen. He didn't say much, just nodded in greeting, and sat in his usual chair by the window, looking out at the dawning meadows. One morning Samuel said, "I'm going into town this weekend. I have to sell my ponies. Would you like to come?" Mary Ellen looked up from the table where she was cutting cloth for towels. "Is there a grocery store there? I want some seeds and a needle and thread." "Yes, and a little restaurant. They make the best beef jerky in the area." "I'll go." She laughed. "It's been a long time since I've heard the noise of the town." The statement made Samuel smile slightly, though it was only fleeting. A light rain fell before the departure. Mary Ellen washed the blankets, while Samuel repaired the carriage. They worked side by side, occasionally exchanging brief words. Neither of them needed to fill the silence. There was a strange sense of harmony in the silence. When the rain stopped, she stood under the porch and looked out over the fields. The drops of water still on the grass glistened in the sunlight like gems. Samuel brought out 2 cups of hot coffee and handed one to her. "Here, after the rain, there is always a strange smell of earth," he said, "sweet but sad." Mary Ellen smiled, inhaling deeply. "It reminds me of that summer in Virginia. I stood in the line of wounded soldiers, hearing the thunder and smelling the same earth. I thought, if I survive that day, I will fear nothing." Samuel looked at her. His eyes were no longer just curious. They were the eyes of someone who recognized a seasoned, determined, but wounded soul before him. "I think you're right," he said softly. "He who has overcome fear is no longer weak. No, Samuel, only those who have been afraid know what courage is." The words made him speechless. A gentle breeze blew through the porch, her hair fluttering. In that moment, he saw the image of Caroline, his ex-wife fading from his memory, replaced by the image of this woman, standing there, calm and warm, like a lamp in the windy night. They set off early on Saturday morning. The road to town was nearly 10 miles, over dry streams and rolling hills. Samuel sat at the helm, Mary Ellen beside him, the wind in his hair, the smell of wild grass. When she arrived, the sound of church bells and the bustle of people greeted her. Redwillow was not a large town, just a few rows of wooden houses, a blacksmith shop, a tavern, and a small market. But to Mary Ellen, it was like another world. She looked at the women in floral dresses, the children chasing each other down the dirt roads, feeling both strange and familiar. Samuel led the horse to the market, and Mary Ellen walked along the stalls. She picked out seeds, some yarn, and a leather-bound notebook. As she paid, she heard the salesman whisper to the person next to her, "Isn't that the new Mrs. Holt? I heard he got married by mail, but it was someone else who came." Mary Ellen stopped, her hand clutching the parcel. She didn't turn around, just smiled, and walked on. When she saw Samuel again at the bus station, she was silent. He noticed it and asked quietly, "What's wrong?" "No, it's just, everywhere there are people who like to talk about other people. Don't worry, they don't know anything about you, but they know you. I'm afraid it will embarrass you." Samuel stopped and looked straight into her eyes. "I'm not embarrassed. I'm just lucky." That statement took her by surprise. They were silent all the way home. The only sound was the rolling of the wheels and the sound of someone's heart beating faster than usual. When they got back to the farm, dusk had fallen. Samuel got out of the car and helped her carry the things in. When she was about to go get some water, he put his hand on her shoulder and stopped her. "Don't worry about the town. Here, it's just you and me. That's enough." Mary Ellen nodded slightly. "Thank you, but I think no one can live without being misunderstood. It's important to know why you came here. You came for honor, right? That was it at first. But now, I'm staying for something else. I'm not sure, but I know I don't want to go." Samuel didn't ask any more questions. He just nodded slightly, then turned away, hiding his smile. That night, when Mary Ellen went out onto the porch, the moon was high in the sky. On the table was a bouquet of wildflowers. Someone had placed it. She touched them. The petals were still wet with dew. Under the vase was a small piece of paper, written in bold handwriting. "This land is harsh, but what is true will always remain. H." She read it over and over again, then smiled softly. A warmth spread through her heart. From that day on, life on the farm became more than just routine. They built fences together, fixed barn roofs together, and laughed about little things. Sometimes Samuel would tell war stories while Mary Ellen would read her poems. One evening, when the sky was dark, Samuel said, "You know, Mary Ellen, I used to think that silence was my refuge, but now I realize that silence can become a home, if someone sits in it with me." Mary Ellen replied softly, "And sometimes no words are enough to know that you are in the right place." The sunset fell, covering the two of them in a warm honey color. In the distance, horses ran across the grasslands, dust flying, neighing like a greeting from this land where two souls had gradually found each other, quietly and persistently. The first day of summer in Redwillow brought a strange sunshine, bright but with a hint of unease. Since early morning, the wind had been blowing harder than usual. Thick clouds were rolling across the sky, as if someone were stirring the air. Samuel stood on the porch. His eyes narrowed, a habit of someone who had lived his whole life on this land and knew when nature was about to get angry. Mary Ellen came out with a basket of laundry, her hair tied back, her skirt streaked with water. She stopped when she saw his tense face. "What's the matter?" "Samuel." He looked west, where the mountains were dyed a deep purple. "This wind is a bad omen. It could be a storm." She looked up at the sky, saw the edges of the clouds rolling black, thunder echoing somewhere like a distant drumbeat. "Can I help?" "We must get the horses into the stable, secure the roof, and put away all the equipment. This storm is worse than you think." They set to work without further words. Samuel led each horse into the stable. Mary Ellen gathered her things and closed the windows. The wind was so strong that sand stung her face. Some of the doors rattled. Samuel ran around the porch, tying up the awning, his voice rising above the wind. "Come inside. I'll take care of it." "No, I won't leave you out here alone," she said, rushing out to help him hold the barn door. The wind blew hard, ruffling her hair. Samuel turned, his eyes shining with a mixture of anger and worry. "You are stubborn, Mary Ellen, and you are more stubborn than any man I have ever met." The strong wind knocked the water tank over. They argued and laughed in the absurd chaos. When the last door was closed, the rain began to fall heavy, fierce, as if it would crush the grasslands. They ran into the house, drenched. Samuel threw aside his wet coat, and Mary Ellen laughed and gasped, her hair sticking to her cheeks. "I have never seen a storm so terrifying and beautiful at the same time," she said, her voice still trembling from the wind. "Did you know that people in the West believe that each storm carries the spirit of the earth? It both punishes and purifies." Thunder boomed and lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating their faces. Mary Ellen stood by the door, watching the rain beat against the ground, a strange feeling rising in her heart, not just fear, but also awakening. Samuel lit the oil lamp and placed it on the table. The flickering light fell on the wall, reflecting the two figures sitting opposite each other in silence. After a while, he spoke. "I used to be afraid of nights like this. After Caroline died, I heard the wind and thought it was her calling. I avoided it, locked the house, and didn't want to hear anything anymore. But now you opened the door to her," she said softly. "Maybe because for the first time, I'm not alone." Mary Ellen was speechless. She just stared at the light, her hand unconsciously twisting the old silver ring on her finger. Something inside her broke slightly, not the pain, but the wall she had built up over the years. Outside, the wind howled. A plank fell off the roof and hit the porch, the noise making Samuel jump. Stay in here. I'll go see." "Are you crazy?" "This wind, I have to tie it down, or the roof will fly off before he could stop him." He rushed outside. Mary Ellen put on her coat and ran after him. The wind was so strong that they had to crouch down and walk with difficulty. Samuel climbed the ladder, trying to tie the plank, while Mary Ellen held the ladder below. Lightning flashed, then thunder rumbled. "Hurry, Samuel," she shouted over the wind. "We're almost done." Just as he finished tying it, a gust of wind blew the ladder over. Mary Ellen screamed and held on, but his weight made it sway violently. Samuel lost his balance and slid down, hitting the eaves. She rushed to catch him, and they both fell to the ground. Rain splashed in his face, mud splashed on his shirt. Samuel struggled to sit up, holding his shoulder. Mary Ellen knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "You're hurt. It's just a sprained shoulder. It's fine. Don't lie. I've bandaged hundreds of people. I know." She pulled him into the house and helped him sit down by the fireplace. His shoulder was bruised under the lamplight. Mary Ellen rolled up her sleeves, dried it, and wrapped it in a clean cloth. Samuel looked at her intently, his voice hoarse. "You don't know how I'm used to suffering, and you don't know how I'm used to caring for others." They looked at each other, in the sound of pouring rain and crackling fire. All distance seemed to melt away. Mary Ellen didn't know how long it took before she realized she was holding his hand. It was warm, rough, but it gave her a strange sense of security. The storm lasted all night. They sat together until the wind died down. The rain became a gentle drizzle, like a tired lullaby from the earth and sky. Samuel spoke softly, his eyes still on the fire. "I thought I would die here, lonely as a winter field. But you came, and tonight's storm no longer frightens me." Mary Ellen looked at him, the firelight reflecting in her deep brown eyes. "Maybe storms are born to test whether people still believe in dawn." He laughed softly, a warm, husky sound. They sat in silence for a while. Then Samuel leaned his head back in the chair, exhausted. Mary Ellen pulled the woolen blanket over his shoulders and sat beside him until he fell asleep. That night, she did not sleep. Outside, the rain was still falling steadily. She wrote in her notebook, in small handwriting, "Tonight, I see more clearly than ever people are not afraid of being alone, but of not being needed. The storm not only swept away the land, it also swept away the fear in me. Here, I am no longer a substitute. I am myself." When dawn came, the sky was as clear as a freshly washed mirror. The fields were wet. The smell of the earth after the rain was strong. Samuel woke up to find Mary Ellen opening the door, the light shining on her hair. He said softly, "The storm is over." She turned and smiled. "Yes, but perhaps what it brought will remain." The next morning, the sun shone through the lingering clouds. The water in the fields sparkled like diamonds. The air was so fresh that every breath felt like a blessing. Samuel stepped out the door, his shoulders still sore, but his eyes brighter after the night. On the porch, Mary Ellen was drying wet blankets, her face shining in the sun as if the storm itself had washed away all her worries. Samuel paused for a moment, looking at her intently. He suddenly realized that in all his life in this land, no one had ever made the house alive like this. Under her hands, everything was coming back to life, from the small vegetable garden to his own heart. "Does your shoulder still hurt?" Mary Ellen asked, her voice light as a breeze. "It still hurts, but I've had worse," Samuel replied, forcing a smile. "You should rest today. Though, I'll take care of the field work. You don't have to do it all." "I know, but I want to." The answer silenced him. In the soft morning light, her hands moved quickly, calm and determined, as if tending to the land was her way of telling the world that she still had value. Samuel tried to stay inside all morning, as he had been told, but his eyes kept darting to the window where Mary Ellen was working. She wore Caroline's straw hat, grass caught in her skirts, sweat glistening on her neck. There was a quiet, rustic beauty he had never seen in anyone. Not the beauty of youth, but the kind that made one want to believe in tomorrow. When she returned with a basket of fresh beans in her hand, Samuel stood up to help her. "You work too hard. If I were a 25-year-old boy, you would have put me to shame." "You can work hard at any age," she replied with a small smile, "if you still want to live a decent life." They set out for lunch. The rain from the night before had cooled the air, and the aroma of coffee and cornbread filled the house. Samuel paused between bites. The storm is over, but this summer may be dry. The soil here is not easy to please. That's okay. The dry soil will wet again. The important thing is that someone is willing to wait for it to revive. Do you always have such strong faith? Not always, Samuel. But I've learned that when you have nothing else to believe in, you have to believe in going forward. Samuel looked at her for a long time, then said softly, "You make me think about many things." In the afternoon, he went to the stables, Mary Ellen following. Dusty, the stubborn horse, had developed a cough after the storm. Samuel bent down to check on him, but his shoulder was still sore, and he could barely move. Mary Ellen said nothing, just knelt down beside him, slowly placed her hand on the horse's head, and whispered a few words. The animal calmed down. Its breathing evened out. Samuel smiled slightly. "What magic do you have for it?" "No, I just listen. Animals are like people. Sometimes they just need someone calm to be there." He looked up at her. The words echoed in his head like a truth he had never realized in all his years of loneliness. The afternoon came. The sky was clear as if it had just been washed clean. They sat on the porch, facing the field stretching to the horizon. The first cicadas of the season sang, thin and persistent. "You know," Samuel said softly, almost afraid of his own words, "Caroline used to dream of having a little garden full of beans and cabbages, like the one you have now. I never thought anyone else could make this place feel the same." Mary Ellen put down her teacup, her eyes soft. "I can't be her, Samuel. Nor do I want to, but I can keep this house warm, if you let me." Samuel did not answer immediately. He looked out at the meadow, where the sun was about to set, and nodded slightly. "I don't think you need any permission." Mary Ellen's heart skipped a beat at that statement. She didn't know how to respond, so she just smiled, feeling an indescribable emotion welling up inside her. That night, when Samuel went upstairs, she remained at the table. She opened her notebook and wrote slowly. "Some people come to us like a storm fierce, causing us pain, but also sweeping away the dust of the past. Perhaps Samuel is that storm in my life, and I am the land that is gradually blooming after the rain." As she put down her pen, a breeze blew through the crack in the door, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Upstairs, Samuel tossed and turned. The image of that woman echoed in his mind, her silhouette leaning against the lamplight, her eyes peaceful in the midst of chaos. He knew something was changing irrevocably. The next morning, Mary Ellen went to the stream to get water, and Samuel followed. They walked together on the small path, the ground still damp. When they reached it, the water reflected the clear sky. Samuel said, "When Caroline was alive, I never thought I would talk to anyone about loss. But you made it easy. Maybe because I've lost too. She didn't talk much about her past. Because it's not important. It's just that the people I love have gone ahead of me. I don't blame them, but I don't forget them either." Samuel nodded silently. A gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of dried lavender from Mary Ellen's basket. He said suddenly, "If you like, we can plant more lavender around the porch this fall. You said the smell calmed you. Right. Yes, it reminds me of the person I lost, but also reminds me that the scent still exists, even though the planter is far away." They looked at each other. No promises were needed, but a silent understanding spread between them. That afternoon, Samuel added a new wooden door, and Mary Ellen hung the blue curtains she had sewn herself. The house looked different, no longer cold, but warm, as if it had a soul. When it got dark, Samuel whispered, "Caroline will be glad to see the house lit up again." "I believe so," she replied, "because light never belongs to just one person." The news that Mary Ellen Granger was still at Holt Farm spread through Redwillow faster than the wind. The town was small, and the story of a middle-aged widow living with a lonely man was not small at all. At the coffee shop down the street, the housewives were whispering over their tea, "They say she came to replace her runaway sister." "Right, yes. And now she's staying with Mr. Holt. What do you think I think if she can make him smile again? Then so be it. But who would believe a woman coming to this country alone?" Samuel heard these words on a trip to town to buy salt and nails. He said nothing, just paid and walked away. But his gaze, cold and direct, silenced everyone for a moment. When he got home, Mary Ellen was drying beans on the porch. She saw his face and knew what was wrong. "Did someone say something to you?" Samuel took off his hat, wiped his sweat, and lowered his voice. "People like to mind other people's business. They say, 'You're here because you want to take over this farm.'" She smiled softly, not angry. In life, the best things we do are often looked at with suspicion. Don't worry about it. But I do worry. Mary Ellen, I can't stand it when people talk about you like that. I can stand it. I've lived with gossip all my life. Now I just want to live my life to the fullest." Samuel looked at her for a long time, his eyes struggling between anger and sympathy. "You are stronger than I thought." "No, Samuel, I am just tired of asking someone for permission to be at peace." That evening, they ate dinner in silence. The wind blew in from the meadows, carrying the faint scent of harvest. Samuel looked at her folded hands, the hands that had done so much good here. Then he put down his chopsticks, his voice low but firm. "If people need a reason to stop talking, I will give them one. What are you going to do? I will take you to church this Sunday, with me as husband and wife." Mary Ellen froze. She looked at him, not in surprise, but with a complicated feeling, fear, gratitude, and want to believe. "You don't have to do this, Samuel. I don't want you to be subjected to more gossip. They'll say whatever they want. But if I don't protect the man who's keeping this house alive, I'm not a man anymore." That sentence left her speechless. She just bowed her head slightly, feeling her heartbeat echoing with the wind outside the porch. On Sunday, the town of Redwillow was dressed like a new man. The people were dressed in their best clothes, and the little church on the hill rang its bells. When Samuel's carriage pulled up in front of the yard, all eyes turned to them. Mary Ellen wore a pale blue dress she had made herself, with pearl buttons at the neck, and her hair pulled back into a bun. Samuel wore a white shirt and a black jacket. Tall, serious, but steady. He got out and walked around to open the door for her. A brief silence fell over the churchyard. But then Mr. Holt, who had lived in seclusion for 4 years, naturally and with dignity, helped the woman down from the carriage. He said softly, "Come on, Mary Ellen." They walked inside, to the last row. The old pastor saw them and nodded slightly. The service was going on as usual, but no one in town was paying attention to the sermon. The silence spoke louder than 100 whispers. When the service ended, a middle-aged woman, the grocer, approached. "Mr. Holt, it's been a long time since you've been to church." "Yes, I think it's time to come back," Samuel replied calmly. She glanced at Mary Ellen and smiled politely. "And she's the one who made me remember that an empty house can't be a home without warmth," Samuel said. "She's Mary Ellen Granger. She's the one I love more than life itself." No one said anything more, but as they walked out of the church, Samuel felt the weight lift from his heart. He took her hand, for the first time, openly. Her hand trembled slightly, but she did not pull away. On the way home, Mary Ellen sat silently. Finally, she said softly, "You don't need to say those words, Samuel. I just want to live in peace, without needing to be honored. I don't say it to honor you. I say it so people know that they have no right to define you." She looked out the window. The fields were vast. The wind carried red dust. But for the first time in her life, she felt strangely peaceful. That evening, Samuel sat at the violin while Mary Ellen made tea. He spoke in a low but soft voice. "I never thought I would dare to go into church again. I feel like Caroline is still looking at me, blaming me for forgetting her. You haven't forgotten. You're just going on living the way she wanted you to." Samuel nodded, his eyes distant. "You know, before, I was always afraid that I wouldn't be able to love again. But today, when I saw you walking beside me, I knew. I was ready." Mary Ellen bowed her head, her voice so soft it was almost a breath. "I'm afraid, too. Samuel, I'm afraid that I'll lose everything again. But maybe, if you're afraid and still choose to stay, that's courage." He put down his guitar and moved closer. The flickering firelight illuminated their faces, illuminating the room. He gently touched her hand, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I can't promise anything, Mary Ellen, but if you stay, I'll spend the rest of my life not hurting you again." A tear fell from the corner of her eye, but the smile remained. Sometimes the truest promises are the ones made in silence. "Samuel." He nodded, saying nothing more. They sat side by side, listening to the sound of the wind outside, the rustling of the grass like a blessing from heaven and earth. And for the first time since arriving in this arid land, Mary Ellen felt truly at home. Autumn came early in Redwillow. The leaves in the fields turned yellow and fell like unclaimed letters. There was something quiet and slow in the air, and in the stillness, Mary Ellen began to feel a fragile peace she had never known. Every morning, she went to the garden to pick vegetables. Samuel took the horse to the fields. At dinner, they sat by the lamplight, talking about small things about the seasons, about migrating birds, about planting more lavender next spring. Everything seemed set for a new chapter until that morning. Samuel was closing the chicken coop when he saw a figure on horseback approaching in the distance. As he got closer, he recognized the mailman's felt hat. The man stopped and held up a slightly crumpled envelope. A letter for Mr. Holt, from the East, from Virginia. Samuel took it, thanked him, and went back into the house. Mary Ellen was lighting the fire and looked strange when he came in. "What's the matter?" "Samuel, it's for me. But it's your name on the envelope." She was surprised. When she picked it up, she recognized the handwriting. Her heart stopped. The slanted, hauntingly familiar words, "From Clara Granger." She sat down, her hands shaking slightly. Samuel stood still, respecting her silence. It was a long time before Mary Ellen opened the letter. Each line felt like a knife touching memories that seemed to have lain dormant. "Sister Mary, I know I did wrong not to come as I promised, but you don't understand. I can't. I'm afraid of that life, afraid to leave the city. You were always stronger than me. When you went instead, I knew you would do better. But now, I need you back. Mom is very sick. Everyone is asking where you are. If you still love me, come back." Clara Mary Ellen put the letter down, feeling confused. She thought Clara, the sister she had acted for, had disappeared from her life forever. But now, those words were like a call from the past, reminding her that she was only a replacement. Samuel read the change in her eyes. "If you need to go home, I will take you. I don't know. I am no longer the person they knew. No matter what, they are still your family." Mary Ellen was silent. She stood up and walked out onto the porch. The field stretched out. The wind blew through her hair, carrying the smell of hay and smoke. She remembered the morning she had left the house, holding the train ticket that was supposed to belong to Clara. She had thought it was just a short trip, a duty, but now it was all destiny. Samuel stepped out and stood beside her. "I was afraid you were going to leave. Mary Ellen." She turned back, her voice trembling slightly. "I was afraid too, because if I left, I didn't know if I would dare come back." They looked at each other for a long time. In those eyes, no need for promises, but filled with things that could not be said. The next day, Mary Ellen woke up earlier than usual. She wrapped the letter and carefully put it in her pocket. Samuel made coffee and placed the cup in front of her. His voice was slow. "I won't stop you, but if you go, know that this is still home. Samuel, I don't want to leave. But my mother, she was the only one who stood by me when I lost everything. I understand. He said so, but his eyes said otherwise." A quiet fear crept in. After years of solitude, he had finally opened up. Now the thought of losing her was overwhelming. They worked side by side all day, but they didn't say much. The atmosphere between them was like the afternoon before a storm, a heavy silence. In the evening, when Samuel went out on the veranda, Mary Ellen was writing something on the table. He did not ask any questions, but just looked at her silently. Finally, she looked up and said softly, "I leave in 2 days. The train leaves Redwillow early this morning." He nodded. His voice choked. "I will take you to the station." She wanted to say something, but then stopped. The night before she left, Mary Ellen didn't sleep. She walked around the house, touching familiar objects: Samuel's china cup, the notebook she'd left on the table, the scarf he'd sewn after the storm. Everything there carried the warmth of him, of the life she'd found. Samuel went down the stairs and saw her standing in the kitchen, the oil lamplight illuminating her sad face. He stopped and said softly, "I don't know what to say. Sometimes it's best to say nothing. I owe you more than I can repay. You don't owe me anything. If anything, it's just a promise that you'll come back. I'll try, but I can't promise. Samuel, I'm afraid I'll be weak and stay there." He approached and stopped in front of her. The night wind carried the scent of dried lavender. He spoke slowly, each word touching her heart. "If you choose to go, remember, you are no longer someone who needs to be replaced. You are yourself, and that is why I choose you forever." She looked at him for a long time. A tear fell, rolling down her cheek. She did not answer, only nodded slightly, as if carving the words deep into her heart. The next morning was foggy. Samuel drove Mary Ellen to the station in the old carriage. They did not speak the whole way. When the train appeared, white steam rose up, obscuring the platform. Mary Ellen turned, her voice choked. "Thank you, Samuel, for everything. I'll wait. It doesn't matter how long." She took his hand. It was rough but warm. The train whistle sounded. She climbed the steps and looked back. Samuel was still standing there, tall and silent, his eyes following her until the train disappeared into the mist. On the train, Mary Ellen sat by the window, watching the golden fields recede. In her heart, two worlds were pulling together, past and present, duty and love. She knew, no matter how far the train went, a part of her heart would remain in that land where a quiet man had taught her that true love did not need promises, just the courage to stay. The train ride lasted 3 days. The nights were long, the yellow light pouring through the misty windows onto Mary Ellen's tired face. She leaned her head against the glass, watching the mountains fade away and then come closer, as if the same old memory were playing over and over again in her mind. Each wheel of the train felt like a heartbeat, heavy and unable to stop. As the train pulled into the final station, Virginia appeared in the rain. The scenery had not changed much, the same hills, the red maple trees, but Mary Ellen felt like she was no longer a woman of this place. She stepped off the platform, the damp wind carrying the smell of home, the smell of things she had tried to forget. As she walked back to her old house, she noticed everything was smaller than she remembered. The wooden gate was peeling paint. The garden that had once been full of roses was now covered with weeds. She stood at the door, hesitating for a moment before knocking. The door opened. Claire appeared, her younger sister, her brown hair tangled, her eyes tired, but still youthfully beautiful. They both froze, silent. No cheers, just the breaths of two women who had shared the same loss, but taken different paths. "Mary, are you really back?" Clara said softly, her voice trembling. "I got your letter. Where is Mother in her room? She is very weak. Come in." The house still smelled of old wood and smoke. She entered the room and saw her mother lying on the bed, her body frail, her silver hair spread out on the pillow. She took her mother's hand. Her old eyes opened slowly, looked at her for a long time, and then burst into tears. "I'm home, Mary Ellen. I'm home, Mom." They hugged each other in silence. The feeling of both strangeness and familiarity made her cry uncontrollably. That night, she sat by her mother's bed and told her about Redwillow, about the farm, about the fields, and about a man named Samuel Holt. Her mother just smiled, her hand shaking as she stroked her daughter's hair. "I know," she said softly. "In his letter." "I see." Mary Ellen started. "He sent a letter." "Yes, a short letter. He said you brought light to that place. I know you have found peace, and I pray you keep it." Hearing that, Mary Ellen's tears welled up again. Samuel kept his word, even though she had already left. The next day, Clara brought tea. They sat across from each other in the kitchen. The wind blew through the window, and the scent of orchids wafted in. "I didn't think you'd come," Clara said, avoiding her eyes. "You couldn't help it. Mother needed you." "I'm sorry, Mary. I was scared of the harsh life out west, scared of becoming someone I didn't know I could be. And you think I can do that for you?" Clara bowed her head, silent. Mary Ellen sighed, her voice slow and sad. "I used to be angry with you, Clara, but living in Redwillow, I realized that sometimes God puts the wrong people in the right places. If it hadn't happened, I would never have known I could love again." Clara looked up, her eyes filled with surprise and regret. "You love him." Mary Ellen looked out the window, where the sunlight was filtering through the clouds. "Maybe so. Not the noisy love, but the kind that makes you want to stay, even though no one forces you to. They were both silent. The atmosphere relaxed. Clara put her hand on her sister's. "I'm really happy for you. Mary, I was selfish, but if I could, I'd like you to go back to where you belong." Those words made Mary Ellen's heart clench. For years, she thought she had to make amends to others, but it turned out that forgiveness began with someone she least expected. That night, her mother grew weaker. In the dim light, she held her mother's hand and heard her say softly, "You must come back. Mary, life should not stop at fear. That man, if he truly loves you, you will know." The next morning, her mother passed away peacefully in her sleep. As the sun rose, its light filtered through the curtains, casting a gentle farewell on her face. The funeral was simple. Clara stood beside her sister, her eyes red and swollen. When it was all over, Mary Ellen stood before the grave, looking up at the clear sky. She knew that a part of her past was closed. On her last day in Virginia, she packed. Clara helped her pack a few old things, a lace handkerchief, a family photograph, and Samuel's letter to their mother. She opened it and read again. "If you are reading this, Mary Ellen is probably gone. I don't know who you are, but I want you to know your daughter brings to me what I thought was lost life. I'm not asking you to send her back to me. I'm asking you to pray that she finds peace, wherever she is." Mary Ellen folded the letter, tears streaming down her face. She knew she could not stay here any longer. Redwillow was waiting, and that man who had made no promises was waiting. In the afternoon, Clara saw her sister off at the train station. They hugged each other for a long time. "Live for yourself," Clara said. "This time, go for yourself, not for me. Yes, for you and for him." As the train pulled away, Mary Ellen looked out the window and saw Clara standing there, waving in the white smoke. There was sadness in her heart, but also the light of someone who chose to forgive, to return. She placed her hand on the letter in her pocket and whispered, "I am coming back. Samuel, I am ready to live, not to atone." The train headed west, past vast fields, past small towns, toward a land where the winds blew hard and hearts were sincere. With each mile, her heart beat faster, as if she knew that at the end of the journey, someone was waiting. The train headed west again, through endless mountains and plains. Mary Ellen watched the scenery pass by the red sunset, the pine trees, the rivers. She felt as if she were traveling between two worlds, one she had left and one she longed to return to. When the train stopped at Redwillow Station, the wind blew in from the fields, carrying with it the familiar smell of hay and dust. Mary Ellen stood for a long time, breathing deeply, feeling as if she had returned to an old dream that her heart had never left. She pulled her small suitcase and walked slowly toward Holt Farm. The road was the same long, empty, and quiet. Crickets chirped in the grass, and in the distance the dim light of the wooden house. Each step made her heart clench. Was he still there? Was Samuel Holt still waiting? It was dark when she reached the gate. The moonlight cast a silvery light over the fields and the old wooden fence. She stopped, intending to knock, but the door opened before her hand could touch it. Samuel stood there. He was thinner, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes were the same calm, warm, and deep as a still lake. In that moment, the world seemed to stop. "I knew you would come back," he said, his voice hoarse and trembling slightly. "Samuel, I'm not sure I dare hope you'll still be here. I have nowhere else to go." Mary Ellen laughed through her tears. He stepped closer, looking her up and down, as if to make sure this was not a dream. "You've lost weight. Was it a long journey? 3 days and a lifetime of waiting." The words made Samuel pause. He held out his hand. "Come in. You need to rest." The house was largely unchanged. The wooden table, the vase of dried lavender, and the notebook her grandmother had left her were still in their original places. But there was one new thing on the wall. Samuel had hung a small charcoal drawing, a portrait of Mary Ellen looking out at the fields, her hair blowing in the wind. She was stunned. "You drew it." "No, a friend did. I just kept it to remember." His voice choked. She turned away, afraid the tears would fall. They sat down by the fire, where the flickering flames illuminated their faces. Samuel poured tea, his hand steady as ever. "I got a letter from your mother. She's dead. Isn't she?" "Yes. She died peacefully. And I think she wanted me to come back here. I prayed every day, not for you to come back, but for you to be at peace. But now I see, both things happening at the same time." Mary Ellen smiled, her voice trembling but warm. "I thought I came back for my mother, but it turned out it was for myself, and perhaps for you." Samuel bowed his head, silent. The fire in his eyes reflected an emotion that was hard to hide. "I've lived my life believing the past cannot be changed," he said slowly. "But you made me realize that sometimes the only thing that needs to change is your heart." Mary Ellen looked at him, her eyes full of tears. "I can't promise anything. Samuel, I don't know what the future holds, but I know I don't want to run anymore. Not from the past. Not from this love." Samuel held out his hand. This time, she did not hesitate. Their hands clasped, no words needed. Outside, the autumn wind blew through the trees, carrying the warm scent of the earth. Both of them sat still, only hearing the sound of their hearts beating in harmony with the wind. "After a while," Samuel said softly, "there is one thing I keep to this day." He stood up, opened a drawer, and took out a small wooden box. Inside was a simple silver necklace with the initials Meg engraved on it, her 3 letters. "I had the silversmith engrave it after that stormy night. I meant to give it to you, but you left." Mary Ellen held the necklace, her hand shaking. "You kept it all this time I didn't," he replied, still looking at her. I waited. A tear rolled down her cheek and fell into her palm. She put the necklace around her neck, feeling like a part of her soul had returned. That night, they said nothing more. They just sat by the fire, listening to the sounds of the western night, the rustling wind, the distant hoot of an owl, and the heartbeats of 2 once lonely people now merging into one. The next morning the sun rose brightly. The fields were golden, a light mist rising. Mary Ellen stood on the porch, the light shining on her face. Samuel came out, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "It's a beautiful day," he said. "Yes, just like the first time I came here. No, this time is different. This time you're not here for anyone else, but for yourself." Mary Ellen looked out into the distance, where the birds were flying in formation. "Samuel, do you think people can find themselves again where they once feared? Yes, if they dare to turn back." And she did. She smiled softly, her eyes as gentle as the wind. "Thank you for waiting." "It's not that I waited," he said, "but my heart has never let you go." A gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of lavender. Mary Ellen closed her eyes, feeling the scent spread throughout the space. like a continuation of a life. In that moment, she knew her long journey was over, but a new beginning was opening, not for replacement, but for true love. The winter winds in Redwillow always blew from the north, cold and long, carrying the scent of snow mixed with the smell of kitchen smoke. For Mary Ellen, this was her first winter here, but she was no longer a stranger. She did not just live in the house, she belonged to it. Samuel rose early, lit a fire in the stove, and went out to the porch to drink coffee. He still did this, but now there was a woman beside him. Mary Ellen sat across from him, a cup of tea in her hand, her hair bathed in the morning light. They spoke little, but the silence between them was warm. Every morning, when the wind whistled through the crack in the door, Samuel would turn and whisper, "Are you cold?" Mary Ellen just smiled. "I've endured winters in Virginia. This cold is just a reminder that I'm still alive." The remark made Samuel laugh softly. His laugh was low and rare, but every time Mary Ellen heard it, her heart softened. In the early winter, they repaired the stable and added a roof to the porch. Mary Ellen hung some dried lavender wreaths in the window, saying it would ward off evil spirits. Samuel looked at them and smiled. "If the scent of lavender keeps the peace, I'll plant a whole field. You'll have to dig a lot. I have someone to help." They looked at each other and laughed. In the afternoon, snow began to fall. The land was covered in white. Samuel stoked more firewood while Mary Ellen sat sewing her sweater. She sewed slowly, each stitch carefully. Every time the wind blew hard and the window rattled, Samuel would board it up again. One night, the wind was fierce and snow covered the roof. The oil lamp flickered, the light trembling. Mary Ellen sat by the fireplace, reading an old book. Samuel looked at her, his voice low. "Do you ever think about the future?" "Mary Ellen." She closed the book and looked up. "Yes, but not far away. Only tomorrow, or next spring. I used to be afraid to think too far. Whenever I imagined the future, I felt empty." "What about now?" Samuel was silent for a moment, then looked into her eyes. "It's different now. When I see you, the years ahead don't seem so scary anymore." Mary Ellen was silent. The firelight reflected off his face, drawing warm lines. She saw in it not just affection, but trust, a rarity even greater than love. "Samuel," she said softly, "I thought I had only a few days left to live, but you made me want to live." He said nothing more. He just gently reached out and took her hand. Outside, the snow was still falling, but in that wooden house, the fire was blazing and people's hearts were warm as spring. The next day, when the snowstorm had passed, the ground was white, and the weak sunlight was everywhere. Samuel and Mary Ellen went out to clear the snow. Dusty the horse neighed when he saw them. Mary Ellen stroked his mane and smiled. "This animal misses you more than me. It only misses who fed it. But maybe it also misses the sound of you talking to it." They laughed together, then worked in silence. The snow was thick, but the air was fresh, every breath like mist. In the afternoon, when the snow was melting, Samuel brought out a large piece of wood. He put it on the table and said, "I want to make something for you." "What is it?" "A bench. Put it on the porch. Then, in the spring, we can sit and watch the meadows." Mary Ellen looked at him and smiled. "You always know how to surprise me. I just learned from you." He worked all afternoon. His hands were large and calloused, but each stroke was meticulous. Mary Ellen stood beside him, occasionally making tea or writing in a notebook. In the notebook, she wrote, "This winter, I learned that silence is not empty. It is the language of those who have been hurt, but still choose to love. Samuel doesn't say much, but his every action speaks. Here, I no longer feel like an outsider. I feel seen, chosen, and believed." When the chair was finished, they sat down together and looked out into the distance. The fields were white, and a few sparrows were flying by. Samuel put his hand on the back of the chair and said, "You see, every winter has to give way to spring." Mary Ellen nodded slightly. "But I think sometimes winter is beautiful, because it is in that cold that we find out who is willing to sit with us until the snow melts." Samuel turned to look at her. The wind was cold, but his eyes were warm. "I am ready. Mary Ellen." As time passed, they lived a simple life. On snowy days, they cooked soup together, knitted blankets, and read old books together. Sometimes Samuel told stories from his childhood about how he skipped school to ride horses, or the first time he saw snow. Mary Ellen giggled, a smile that made him look 10 years younger. One evening, Samuel suddenly said, "I have something to ask you." "What? Do you regret coming here? If you hadn't come, maybe you would have lived a different life now, an easier one." Mary Ellen put down her teacup and looked at him for a long time. "Samuel, every life has its own pain. I chose to stay here not because it's easy, but because this place has me. For real." He nodded, his eyes showing emotion. "Then I know. I have not waited in vain." That night, the snow fell heavily. They sat closer together, listening to the wind howling on the porch. Mary Ellen leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time spoke of her ex-husband, who had died in the war. She spoke softly, but slowly. "I loved him, but it was a young love blind and fragile. When he died, I thought I would die too. But it turns out that a person can die many times and still live. Samuel, you made me believe that there are people who come not to fill a void, but to open a new door." Samuel was silent for a long time. Then he squeezed her hand and said only one sentence. "I lost myself too, Mary Ellen, but since you came, I have found the human part of me again." That sentence, in the quiet space, was like an oath without witnesses. The next morning, the snow had stopped falling. Sunlight streamed through the windows, reflecting off the wooden table and the newly made chair. Mary Ellen opened the door and took a deep breath. It was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. "Samuel," she called, "come out here and look." He came out, still wearing his old sweater. "What spring is almost here? The grass is coming through the snow." He looked and smiled softly. "A weed, but resilient, like you. What about you? Me, I am the soil, holding space for you to take root." They looked at each other, then laughed. Day by day, the snow melted, and the first flowers appeared. That winter ended with a golden afternoon, when they sat on the porch chairs, silently watching the sunset. Samuel turned, his voice low but firm. "Mary Ellen, if one day I am no longer here, don't be sad. Remember, I have lived a full life because of you." She shook her head. "Don't say that. We have many more days." "I know. But I want to tell you, so you understand love is not about holding on. It is about knowing when you are given and being grateful for it." Mary Ellen took his hand, her eyes shining. "I'm not afraid of losing you." "Samuel, I'm just afraid of not being able to say thank you. Thank you for choosing me when no one else would." Samuel shook her hand and smiled. "I didn't choose you, Mary Ellen. I just realized that I've been waiting for you all my life without knowing it." The last rays of sunlight fell, covering the fields in gold. In that light, two middle-aged men sat side by side, silent but complete, as if the whole world had been put back into place. That was their first winter together. A winter not only with snow and wind, but also with the warmth of two hearts that had been worn down by the winds of life, now finding each other in the seemingly barren land. Spring came early in Redwillow. The last snow melted from the fields, revealing a lush green. Sparrows returned to their nests on the eaves and in the little wooden house. Mary Ellen and Samuel's laughter echoed through the smell of morning coffee and pastries. After a long winter, life on the farm resumed its familiar rhythms: work, markets, the laughter of neighbors visiting. But amid the normalcy, something had changed. Samuel became quieter, his eyes lingering on Mary Ellen's face more often, as if afraid to miss something. One morning, while she was hanging her blankets out in the yard, Samuel came out with a letter in his hand. "Someone sent it to you. From Virginia." Mary Ellen wiped her hands and took it. It was written in her sister Clara's handwriting. "Mary, Holt Farm must be in bloom. I miss you. Mother died peacefully, and I have started a new life. But there is one thing I want you to know. You taught me what no one else has taught me, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the daring to live in spite of fear, live for me, too. Clara." Mary Ellen read slowly, each word sinking into her heart. Samuel looked at her silently, understanding that the letter was the final farewell to a chapter of her life. She folded the letter and put it in the drawer. "Your sister seems to have found peace." "Yes, and I think it's time for me to be true to myself, too." Samuel smiled and said slowly, "You did it, Mary Ellen. Since you came back, this house is no longer just wood and stone. It has a heart." The sentence made her look up at him, her eyes filled with an indescribable emotion. In the afternoon, they went out to the fields. The wind was cool, the grass was swaying, the sky was as clear as a mirror. Mary Ellen had her little notebook with her, the one she had been writing in since her arrival at Redwillow. She opened it and wrote a new line. "I have come here twice, the first time out of duty, the second time out of love. The first time I ran away, the second time I returned. And now I have nowhere else to go." Samuel came up and stood behind her, reading quietly. He touched her shoulder gently. "You write better than I thought. I only write what I feel. Then you feel it deeply." Mary Ellen smiled slightly. The wind blew a few strands of her hair, and Samuel brushed them away, the movement so slight that it seemed to disturb the peaceful atmosphere around them. In the following days, Redwillow bustled with planting. Samuel and Mary Ellen worked the land and built fences. She learned how to rope, count cows, and even repair a wagon wheel. Each evening, they sat on the porch and watched the red sunset spread across the fields. One afternoon, while sowing seeds, Samuel suddenly stopped and put his hand to his chest. Mary Ellen saw his face pale. "Samuel," he smiled faintly, but his voice was weak. "I guess I'm just tired. I'm fine." But she didn't believe it. That night, as he slept, she heard him coughing heavily and breathing heavily. She sat up and touched his forehead. It was burning. Early the next morning, she went to call the town doctor. The old doctor shook his head. "Mr. Holt must rest. His heart is weak." He overexerted himself last winter. Mary Ellen took Samuel's hand. Her eyes red. You didn't tell me your heart was weak, because I didn't want you to worry. I'm here to take care of everything with you. Samuel, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Samuel was silent, then smiled, his eyes gentle. You are like the red willow wind, sometimes as light as mist, sometimes so strong that it blows down the wall in my heart. From that day on, she took care of him little by little. Every morning, she made herbal tea and read books with him. Every evening, she lit a fire and told him stories about her childhood in Virginia, about her unfulfilled dreams. Samuel listened, his eyes peaceful. One night, as it was raining lightly, Samuel took her hand, his voice hoarse. Mary Ellen, if I don't make it, will you promise me one thing? Don't say that. Samuel? Promise. Okay, I promise. Stay in Redwillow. Even if I die, you must continue to live here. Grow flowers, bake cakes, write books, do whatever makes you feel alive. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I will stay, but you must promise not to leave early. I will try, because I want to see one more spring with you. But life doesn't keep its promises. One morning, just as dawn was breaking, Mary Ellen woke up early and made coffee as usual. She heard the wind outside the window, the birds chirping. When she brought the cup of coffee into the room, Samuel was still lying there, his face calm as if he were sleeping. She put down the cup and called softly, Samuel, wake up. The weather's beautiful. There was no answer. She moved closer and touched his hand. It was cold. In that moment, her world fell silent. The wind, the birds, the heartbeat, all of it vanished. Mary Ellen sat down beside the bed, holding his hand, her lips trembling. You promised. Her tears fell on his hand, melting like morning dew. The whole town of Redwillow came to pay their respects. A simple funeral was held in the fields. On the pine coffin, Mary Ellen placed a bouquet of dried lavender, which Samuel had said he would plant in a field if it would bring peace. After the ceremony, when everyone had gone home, she remained standing. The wind blew through the fields, and the scent of lavender wafted in the air. She opened her notebook and wrote, You are gone, but I am not alone. Because I understand, there are people who stay not by being with me, but by living in every breath, every ray of sunshine. I will continue to live. Samuel, I will keep my word. Time passed. It was summer again in Redwillow. Mary Ellen still lived in the old wooden house. Every morning she went out to water the flowers, talked to Dusty, and sometimes made 2 cups of coffee, as was her old habit, one for herself, one for him. She began teaching the children of the area to read and write. The children of Redwillow loved her, a woman with silver hair, kind eyes, and a voice as warm as the sun. She told them stories of brave people, of a land that loved and forgave. One afternoon, as she sat writing on the porch, a young girl came up to her. Ma'am, I heard about Mr. Holt and you. Is it true? Mary Ellen looked at her and smiled. Yes, but the important thing is not that he died, but how he lived, and how you loved him. No, dear, how we believed in each other. The young girl looked stunned, then bowed her head in thanks. When she was gone, Mary Ellen looked out at the fields where the afternoon sun was stretching out. She smiled and whispered, See, Samuel, the lavender is blooming again. That evening, the sky was clear. She sat on the bench that Samuel had made and wrote the last line in her notebook. I used to be afraid of love, but now I know. Love never dies. It just changes shape into light, into wind, into the scent of lavender that passes through the seasons. Samuel Holt was not just my lover. He was the best part of myself I ever found. She closed the book, put it on the table, and sat quietly looking up at the night sky. The Milky Way stretched out brightly above. She said softly, "See you again, Samuel, somewhere where the wind still blows like in Redwillow." The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight shone through the window, Mary Ellen did not wake up. She passed away in her sleep, her face peaceful as if in a dream. The people of Redwillow buried her beside Samuel, under a large maple tree in the middle of the field. On their grave was carved a simple inscription: "Here rest Samuel Holt and Mary Ellen Granger, two souls who found home in each other. Every year, when the April wind blew, the lavender fields in front of their house would bloom, turning the area purple." The townspeople said that on quiet evenings, if you listened carefully, you could hear soft laughter coming from the old wooden porch, the voices of two people who had loved each other for their entire lives, and now lay together in peace. And in Redwillow, people still tell that story to their children and grandchildren, the story of a woman sent to replace her sister, but who found true love in an unexpected place. A story of courage, choice, and the power of silence. Mary Ellen once wrote, "Sometimes life takes us to the harshest places, not to punish, but to heal. And if we are brave enough to stay, we will see some winters are, in fact, just a prelude to spring." That story, over time, became a small legend of Redwillow, a reminder that, no matter how many years pass, true love never grows old. It only changes shape, becomes the scent of the wind, the sound of birds, and the light of dawn on the field where those two people once chose each other. Forever. The story of Mary Ellen and Samuel reminds us that true love does not come from flowery promises, but from calm, patience, and understanding. That sometimes what seems like a mistake is actually a gift of life sending us to the right person, in the right place, at the right time, and that, no matter what age we are, we can still start over. We can still love, and we can still be loved if our hearts are open to the world. Mary Ellen was not chosen, but she was seen, loved, and made. That is the simplest miracle of life. Thank you for listening to this journey to the end. If this story touches your heart, please like, share to spread the warmth, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories, where every memory, every life, deserves to be told.